Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I'll be going over my thoughts on the newly added weight and fatigue system after some time playing with the new mechanics and doing some testing of my own. This is already proven to be a controversial change within the community, but personally, I think it's a good idea and it makes sense within the context of Escape From Tarkov. I won't go into crazy detail on my thoughts right here, but after I talk about the testing I did to see the full extent of the new weight mechanics, there'll be a section of the video where I'll give my opinions on why I think these new mechanics are a positive addition overall. To start with, I'll just give a brief explanation of how I did my testing and how I'll be presenting the information. What I did to test these mechanics and how they apply as more weight is added to your character is fairly simple. I went into an offline raid with an items case in my backpack and every slot filled with a stack of 20 shotgun shells, which weigh exactly 1 kilogram. This means that just by dropping one stack of shells, I could alter the weight by exactly 1 kilogram, so I started at 85 kilograms and tested the effects on stamina and movement, then dropped a few kg and tested it again. Initially, I started testing 1 kilogram at a time, but it quickly became clear that the weight thresholds are much farther apart. Each of these thresholds have a set of effects that seem to apply as long as you're within that weight tier, but are more severe with more weight. So for example, 65 to 74.9 kilograms have about the same set of effects, but they're more severe at 74.9 kilograms. One thing you should definitely keep in mind here is that the weight thresholds have already been adjusted 2 or 3 times since the patch was released, and it's highly likely they'll be adjusted again. I'll try and keep any changes to these numbers up to date in the description. These thresholds will also increase very slightly as you level up your strength skill, and these were all tested with a skill of 1 on my character. To start this off, we have the base weight threshold, which as far as I can tell has no real penalties to movement, sound, or stamina use and recovery whatsoever. This threshold at the moment starts from 0 kilograms all the way up to 39.9 kilograms, and I tested every 5 kilogram increment but didn't see any changes. One thing I did notice during this test though, is that at all weight levels, you drain stamina from both your arms and legs when you rise from a prone position to a crouching or standing position. This stamina drain seems to rise as you add more weight into your backpack, at least on your arms, and becomes quite high when you are seriously overweight. The second weight threshold I've found starts as soon as you go over 40 kilograms of total weight carried, and I'm calling this the light overweight threshold. The penalties here are fairly minor, but this is where weight starts to actually affect your movement. As far as I can tell, most of these penalties increase linearly as you add more weight, so they're most severe at 49.9 and least severe at 40.1. While in this threshold, walking doesn't drain stamina, but crouch walking does drain stamina, starting from a very low amount and increasing as you add more weight. Your overall walk speed is slightly decreased, jump height is decreased, movement sound is increased, and stamina drain is increased. But within this threshold, these penalties aren't really too severe. While being light overweight does start to have effects on your overall movement, I would say that this threshold is kind of the sweet spot for looting, and I would begin dropping low value items to stay in this tier and under the next one. You can still maneuver fairly well in escape situations, but you do start to feel the effects of being overweight here, especially as you get closer to 49.9 kilograms. The next threshold for the weight system seems to start at 50 kilograms and goes all the way up to 59.9 kg, and I'm calling this one the moderate overweight threshold. Within these weight limits, the penalties start to become more of a hindrance to your overall effectiveness, and while it's not completely crippling, you're really going to need to move smart and plan your routes if you want to move long distances safely while carrying over 50 kilograms of loot. This threshold is something I would aim to stay out of unless everything in your backpack is extremely valuable or important for a quest. So I would try and drop low value items and stay out of this threshold if possible. Starting at 50 kilograms, walking starts to drain your stamina, which means you need to stop and remain still to recover your stamina. This is a pretty big debuff, and you'll need to watch your stamina carefully. This stamina drain increases as more weight is carried. Your overall walking speed isn't really decreased by too much, however, and you can still sprint as normal, though with a higher stamina drain. These additional debuffs are all added to the basic overweight debuffs from the last tier as well, so you'll be louder and can't jump as high. As I said earlier, this tier isn't completely crippling, but if you can avoid being over 50 kilograms, I would suggest it. The next weight threshold starts at 60 kilograms and seems to increase in severity right up until 75 kilograms of weight carried, and this is where the penalties start to really become intense. First, Your base walk speed will be slowed increasingly as you carry more weight, from 60 kilograms to 75 kilograms, until you are walking with what feels like two broken legs. You can still sprint, but you have to build momentum for a few steps before you begin to sprint. The amount of time it takes to build this momentum is increased as you carry more weight, so the more you carry, the longer it takes before you can sprint. This is a really harsh penalty as well, and leaves you basically unable to escape if someone starts shooting at you. You also continue to lose more and more stamina from walking as you add more weight, so this weight tier should be avoided at all costs. Personally, I can't really think of anything in the game that's valuable enough to risk these penalties and try to carry 70 plus kg of loot across the map. In certain situations, you might be able to pull it off or be forced to pull it off, but I would say avoid going over 60 kilograms unless you're very confident you have a short and safe route to extraction. Finally, we have the highest penalty you can get for being overweight, which comes into effect when carrying anything over 75 kilograms. This is the critical overweight threshold, and the penalties here are completely crippling. I started off at 85 kilograms and this effect stayed consistent all the way down to 74.9, so I think it's safe to say that anything over 75 gives these same penalties. When you're at critical overweight, you can't sprint, your walk speed is slowed to the lowest possible amount, you can't regenerate stamina while standing, and you have this on top of all of the other overweight debuffs. Basically, you're a dead man walking if you carry over 75 kilograms of items, so manage your weight, avoid picking up low value, high weight items, and just keep yourself out of the red zone on the Tarkov weight scale. As for the fatigue mechanic, as far as I can tell, it activates if you continually drain your stamina bar multiple times over a short period of time. The debuff says it increases your energy consumption, but it also seems to actually affect how low you can drain your stamina before you can't sprint anymore. If you go into your character's health menu after you get fatigued, you can see the energy drain, and there's also a timer which indicates how long the fatigue will last. Now that I've gone over my testing and what I found for the weight thresholds and how they affect your character, I'd like to give my thoughts on why I personally like the new mechanics. First and foremost, I think it's going to be a great step towards encouraging more diversity in loadouts, and giving more of a reason to use gear that kind of seemed like it didn't really have a place. Because players now need to consider the weight of their own equipment, it means that equipping the heaviest, most protective gear and the biggest backpack available isn't always the default option. Some examples of this include my personal favorite, the Gazelle armor, which is now not only a cheap class 5 armor, but one of the most lightweight high tier vests available, which gives it a solid purpose in the gear rotation. Another fairly new item, the Haley Strategic Chest Harness, is also on my radar suddenly because it has a very nice combination of lightweight and decent magazine storage. Tons of other items like the MICH helmets, M2 rig, and trooper armor also got a sudden boost in effectiveness simply because they're the lightest weight items in their categories. I for one am really excited to start theory crafting lightweight loadouts and see what I can come up with, especially once you consider that the meta builds for weapons might start changing to the most weight efficient setups with low recoil, which will be a huge change to the overall meta. When it comes to looting, this change is a bit trickier to frame in a totally positive light, but I still enjoy the balancing act of deciding whether something is worth its weight in rubles. On one hand, I don't think it actually affects the looting of most items that are considered high value, especially the vast majority of valuable barter items. I have run many raids on reserve with a backpack full of valuable loot and didn't hit 50 kilograms on most games, unless I was stacked up with certain things like fuel containers, guns, or batteries. It's going to hurt people who follow the loot vacuum strategy and just pick up literally everything, but if you have even a decent grasp on what is worth picking up and what is just dead weight, you can easily loot big hauls and not be too overweight. The part of looting that is really affected by the weight system is PvP loot though, and I do understand the arguments made about why this is a bad thing, but I can also see a small positive here. Gear like armor, weapons, and tactical rigs are very often the heaviest items you'll have in your backpack, and you quickly go overweight if you pick up a lot of armor and weapons from kills. While this loot is often not worth a lot of rubles compared to the space it takes, it's also some of the most useful loot, especially for players who can't just buy their own gear. This sort of places the harshest punishment on players who are already behind in the race, which is maybe not the most ideal situation in a game like Tarkov, where it's already really hard to get ahead. On top of this, PvP loot is often the single most exciting type of loot to get, because it's gear that you earned with your own two hands through skill, precision, and good play. I think almost everyone can agree that one of the most rewarding feelings in Tarkov comes from dropping an enemy player and getting out with a sweet haul of gear thanks to the recently deceased. With that being said, it kinda cheapens the thrill when you can only realistically grab a few things from them without penalizing yourself. One positive thing I do see coming from this though, is that insurance might have just gotten a lot more effective. If people are less likely to loot low value, high weight items like full rigs, broken armor, full weapons, and mags, we might just start seeing a lot more insurance returns. I have faith that the developers will continue to tweak things until we have a system that everyone is more or less happy with, so I'm not jumping to any radical conclusions. There's already been mention of a comfort system that will affect how much your own gear weighs you down, so obviously they're thinking ahead and have more tweaks and features in mind, so I'm just going to remain optimistic and roll with the punches. One thing I will say about the change in general is that I think the timing was a bit bad. This was one of the single biggest changes in the game's history, and I feel the player base would have an easier time adjusting if it was added at the start of a fresh wipe. For one, players would be much less salty about the strength and endurance reset, and it wouldn't have negatively impacted so many players in their hideout construction. However, on the flip side, I can see how it sort of makes it easier for the developers to gather data on how people use high tier items with the new system, since more players have access to that right now. In any case, it's not my game, and I'm no expert at developing software, so whatever I think doesn't really matter anyways. These are just my opinions, and as I said, I have faith the developers will figure it out. Well, that about covers it for this video on the new weight mechanics in Escape from Tarkov. I hope you found it helpful and have a good understanding of how the new systems will affect your gameplay. It's going to take some adjustment, just like all the other changes to healing, mag loading, and everything else before it. However, that's kind of the beauty of Tarkov to me. It actually evolves and changes dramatically over time, and it's been a fun ride so far. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch at twitch.tv/jdogthewise, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll leave a link for that down in the description. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.